Hello people, my name is Folusha Oladikwo and you are welcome to the second video in my tutorial on how to write end-to-end tests using Nightwatch, Selenium and the Chrome web browser. In the last video, I showed you how to set up your testing environment such that you could write tests using Nightwatch and then run them against a Chrome browser. So in this video, I'm going to show you how I'm going to go into more detail about the things you can test concerning your web app. And well, let me just cut the talk and get to it. So this is where we stopped in the last video, where we just made sure that the title was something and that a particular element was visible and contained this text. So going back to my app now, I also want to further test that this element exists, this blue background, this element with the blue background exists, and I also want to test that the container for this button is there, because these buttons are actually buttons from Firebase authentication UI. So I want to make sure that the container is there and consequently the login buttons are there. Finally, I also want to test if the slider is there. So if I use the inspect utility, I'm going to discover that this first element I want to make sure is there is an H4 with the following classes. So I'm going to build off of the sample test we wrote in the last tutorial, and instead of sample test now, I'm going to name it home page test, because we are essentially testing the home page where the user gets to log in. So I'm going to add additional tests and say assert that certain element is visible. There's an H4 and is an alert. Has the following classes: alert, info, and text center. Yes, that's about it. I also want to make sure that that same element assert that same element contains the text please sign in below, which I'm going to go back to copy in a second, but yeah. So I also want to make sure it contains this text, and there it goes. Next thing I want to assert is that I want to assert that the container for these buttons is there, and that's Firebase UI auth container. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to assert that it's visible. The element is this guy. Now I want to explain that when you are when you want to specify the elements you are checking for, you essentially use CSS selectors. So here, this is a selector for an element with an ID of Firebase auth container. As you can see here, this is Firebase auth container. If you are not that comfortable with CSS, I suggest you go online and take a couple of tutorials. It's not that difficult, but it will be helpful if you don't really understand how CSS selectors work. So the next element I'm going to be checking for, which is actually the last on this page, is that this slider, I want to make sure that it's up and running and it's shown. And so its own ID is homepage slider. So, and I'm going to assert that it's visible, and the usual drill of this. Now that I've written all those tests, I'm going to go ahead and run them. So in the terminal, I'm going to do dot /node modules bin Nightwatch. And I'm going to wait and allow Nightwatch to do its thing. Tap, 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 tap. Wow, you see, so all the new tests we've added, they all succeeded because by the time Nightwatch got to that page, those elements were actually there. Now, before I go on to the second part of this tutorial, I want to state that for you to really have the full power of Nightwatch at your fingertips, to be able to actually test various things in your web app, you really need to go to their documentation and read the details of their API. So I'm going to go to the Nightwatch website, and the real place you want to go to is here in the API reference. You really want to read all these guys. So for example, here I've been using something called wait for element visible. But what this means is that an element is in the DOM, is in the document that you loaded, and is also in the and it's also visible to a user. You can actually test whether an element is in the DOM, but it's actually invisible. So something like that is called wait for element present. And if you go to the commands here, you see a lot of stuff, a lot of commands and a lot of options in their API. But what I just described to you is called wait for element present. Sorry, wait for element present. You also have wait for element not present and wait for element not visible. And obviously those two commands are the opposites of wait for element not any wait for element present and wait for element not present respectively. And you really see the use of this in the second part, but I strongly urge you to go and read as much as possible of this API documentation so that you have the real power of you have the real power of Nightwatch at your fingertips. The second part I'm going to be testing here is that you'll notice that all we've tested in this app is just its appearance. We've tested that, yeah. We've tested that, yeah. This text is there, this text is there, this, that. But we've not really tested that. Okay, what if I click this button? What happens? Does the button work? And if it works, where does it take me to? So I'm going to try to do is that I'm going to try and go into this guy and look for. I'm going to try and see if I can fetch that particular item. So this one is the Google sign in button, and I want to see in the app itself. I want to check something. Click on that button. Let's see what happens. Yeah. So I'm going to be testing that when I click on the button, it sends me to this page. I want to make sure that when I click on the button, it sends me to a page that has a URL similar to something like this. So I'm going to copy this for now. And let's not forget that I need selector for that button that I clicked. And so I'm going to go into this guy and the authentication container. Give me a second here. Yeah, the authentication container. I'm going to fish out that button. So this particular button, the difference between that button and the Facebook button is this one has Firebase UI IDP Google, whereas this one has Firebase UI IDP Facebook. So I'm going to go to my script here, and I'm going to oh, Java wants to update. Maybe later. I'm going to go to here, and I'm going to say click the button that is in um, Firebase UI auth container and a form, and then the button that has the class Firebase UI IDP Google. Right. So I'm going to click that button, and then I'm going to I'm going to wait actually, because if you come to the UI and you click this button, you will notice that it takes a while for the login page on my app to go away, and then for Firebase to do its magic and bring you to the sign-in page of Google. So I'm going, after clicking this button, I'm going to wait for elements not visible, not present. Not just that it's not visible. I want to make sure the element is no longer in the DOM. So wait for element not present. This guy, this Firebase UI container. So I'm going to paste that. And how long do I want to wait? I want to wait for 1 second. After which I want to pause, because as you'll notice, even after leaving the page, Firebase UI does a couple of redirects. If you notice, this URL changes, it does a couple of redirects before bringing you to the final sign-in page. So I'm going to wait for a couple of seconds, and if you're waiting and you're not doing anything in Nightwatch, you use the pause command. So if you just leave it like that, if you leave it like I wrote it right now without any arguments, Nightwatch will wait indefinitely. But I want to wait just for, say, 10 seconds. So I'm going to wait for 10,000 milliseconds, which is 10 seconds. Now, the last thing I want to do is that I want to assert that after all that wait, the URL contains where I intend to be, which is the Firebase, the Google sign-in page. So the Google sign-in page, and we're just going to copy a little bit of it, say the beginning, and then paste it here. So to recap, essentially after starting my app and testing that it looks right, I'm going to click the Firebase sign-in button for Google, and then I'm going to wait for the Google sign-in, my own homepage to go away and Google's pages start showing up, and I'm going to wait for 10 seconds so that all of Google's redirects will happen, and then I'm going to make sure and test that the final URL I'm at right now is the Google sign-in auth page. All right, so let me run that. Yeah, okay. All right, seems everything looks good. So it says here that element, this was not present after 2100 milliseconds, and that everything is right. That also after waiting for 10 seconds and not doing anything and check the URL, it saw that it's matched with this pattern. So I'm good to go. So that's one of the ways you can test the functionality of your web app. And I want to say before I go to the last part of this tutorial that sometimes when you are doing things like weights and all that, your tests might fail not because you didn't test for the right things, but just because the browser or your network is taking long to load up the page or the elements you are looking for. So once in a while, you might have to tinkle with these guys, these time limits that you give to, because I'm pretty sure if I reduce this time to say 100 milliseconds, which is essentially like zero point 0.1 second, um, I have a good hunch that this thing is going to fail because by then the Firebase auth container wouldn't have been removed from the page yet. And okay, it finds and it's loading. So you see it failed because it says timed out while waiting for the element to be removed in 100 seconds. But if I put it back at 1000, I think it should work. And let's wait and see. You see, so now this time around, it didn't, you could, after waiting for 1 second, this element was still there. So I'm pointing this out to you out of experience because a couple of times I've had to work on tests that were working fine like 2 minutes ago, and then I come back and discover that they are failing, only to realize that it's not because my tests were wrong. It was because the Nightwatch and test runner was timing out because my internet was slower or something like that. So I've increased this timeout to 3 seconds. Let me run the test again and let's see. And it's understandable because I mean, after clicking this button, you'll notice that there's this loader, right? There's this loader that shows up. So it should give you should give Nightwatch as much time as possible in that stage. And that's why I even give this pause 10 seconds so that all the redirects can happen and then you'll move forward. So the last part I want to show you is some tests that are kind of like more advanced than this one, and it's for another project I wrote called Docs Cabinet. It's essentially a document manager. And let's come to Docs Cabinet here. Let me open that up. Now, the structure of the E2E test for this one is the structure is quite different from that first one. As you remember, we were writing E2E tests from the start from scratch for that other project. But for this project, I've already written E2E tests back when I was building it. And to convince you of that, let me show you my nightwatch.json, and you see that the source folders here is client, source. So let me just open this. Client, source, tests, E2E. So you notice that as opposed to the news app I just closed, where my E2E tests were just in E2E underscore tests, right? This one is inside client, then source, then tests, then E2E. And you can see a couple of tests. Now, this one is, so before I even like start explaining this one, I'm going to run it in the browser for you to see. So npm start. Bingo. And this one is running on port 5000. So no, 5000 please. All right. So this is the second app, and you notice that this one, the sign-in for this one is not managed by Firebase UI or Firebase authentication. Is managed by the app itself. So there's a sign-in button and there's the login button. So we can do a quick test for like the home page, and let me see. Let me create a new file. Let's call this one homepage test again. Homepage and test .js. Okay, yeah. So module, let's export. So I'm intentionally not skipping this so that you can see me do it again, and let's just go on its home page. Page tests and function 9. And yeah, take client, and then go to the URL. I think it's just say HTTP localhost port 5000. Yeah, and I'm going to wait for the page to load up. So I'm going to say wait for element visible. It's body. I'm going to wait for say 3 seconds. Right, and yeah, I think let's add an end here for now, and then I'm going to run this. So when you want to run Nightwatch, you can make it run all the tests in your source folder, or in this case, I'm going to make you run all the tests. I'm going to make you run only this test, so I'm going to say /node modules .bin /nightwatch, and then what I want to run is client source test and e2e, and then homepage test.js. So it's going to run just the test in that file because I don't want us to have to go through all these other tests. And you can see that I waited for the body to be visible and went ahead. So a couple of things you might want to test for is that number one, the sign up button is there and the login button is there. So I'm just going to inspect these guys. And here is the sign up button and the login form button. Okay, so I'm going to assert that it's visible. Sign up button. I'm also going to assert that the login form button is also visible. Yep. Second one is login form, right? Yep. Okay. So these two guys should be visible after the form has loaded up. The home page has loaded up. So I'm going to run this guy again. Now, to really test the functionality of the sign up button, I'm going to do a few things. I'm going to click this guy, and then since it's sign up and this says that all the fields are required, ideally, if I were to be a real user and I said something like fk blah 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 at example.com and I just gave something random there. If I try to sign up, I see an error message that says there should be a first name. And if I supply the first name and I don't supply the last name, I should see an error that says please enter a last name. So I want to test this with Nightwatch. So watch me do that. So I'm going to click this sign up button. I'm going to click the sign up button and then wait for element visible. I'm going to wait for this form to be visible. So that form should be this guy, which doesn't have an ID, but I think I can use this one, sign up form. Yeah. So wait for element visible, sign up form, and how many seconds? Just wait for say 2 seconds, which is 2000 milliseconds. And then after the form is visible, I'm going to use Nightwatch to only set these two values and then click the sign up button. So this particular field is has an ID of update username. So ID update username. So if you want to simulate the filling of a form in Nightwatch, the command you use is set value, and you have set value here and says it takes two arguments, the elements you are selecting and the value you want to put into it. So in this case, I'm going to do set value. This element, the update username, and I'm just going to set its value to random at example.com. I'm going to duplicate that, and the second field is update password. Updates password. Now, this app has strict rules for passwords, and the rules are that if you over, it says, although the UI is misbehaving, but it says an acceptable password must be at least 8 characters long and contain an uppercase and a lowercase letter and a number and a special character. I know that by now, so let's just do A, B. Okay, let's do A1. Yeah. So, and the password has to be 8 characters long at least. So let's just add an A, B, C. Anyway, yes, yeah. Okay. So, but this will fail because it expects me to fill the first name and last name too. So I'm going to assert that when I click this button, this message shows up. So I'm going to click the submit button that has an ID of what? Has an ID of sign up button. And then I'm going to wait for this error message to be visible. And what is the ID of this error message? Okay, doesn't have an ID, it just has a class. Okay, so I'm going to wait for element visible. P element with these classes. To wait for it to be visible, and I'm going to also make sure that it shows up by putting in an assert that it's visible. Yeah. So I'm going to assert that it's visible, and finally I'm going to assert that it contains the right text. So I'm going to assert that this guy contains text, the text of this. Okay. So I'm going to make sure that all these things work. Just to add good measure, I'm going to set these fields to nothing as well. So this is update first name and this is update last name. Okay. So update first name, just set it to something empty, and update last name, set it to something empty as well. So this rounds it up and shows you that I'm setting this guy to something empty, this other guy to something empty. I'm putting in two valid inputs for these guys, and then I'm clicking the sign up button. I'm going to wait a while and then check that this error message shows up and that shows the right error message. Yeah, sounds like tautology, but anyway, let's run the test and see what we have. Okay, the test failed, and it failed because it says okay, so I forgot to add a time limit here, and that should be, let's just say 2 seconds, 2000 milliseconds, and then I'm going to run that again. Okay, filled again, and says the text, oh, sorry, I was checking for please enter a last name, whereas these two non-white space characters. Oh, yeah, last name instead of first name. So this should be first. Nice, that page always showing up. And yeah, okay, so tests ran and they were successful. They tried to sign up, but in doing so, they didn't fill all the necessary fields. So the sign up field with the right error message. So this is where I'm going to bring my tutorial to a close, and I hope you enjoyed it. Please, while watching it, if you find any problems, anything you think I should correct or clarify, please let me know in the comments below, and I'll sure to respond. I'll be sure to respond to your feedback. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and let me know anything you want me to publish a tutorial about. Thank you very much for watching and do have a nice day.